I want to say good morning to each and every one of you, and welcome to another edition of Strengthening Families. Um, and we're talking about today the continuing discussion on uh, our young boys, dealing with our young boys, and of course, being a part of the Black church, a Baptist Black church, um, is strengthening the family. And the only way that we can strengthen the family is to um, focus in on our men, to focus in on our young boys. I think prevention is better than trying to come in after a young man has uh, become grown. I think that our interventions are most effective when we are dealing with our young boys from the cradle all the way to the time that God calls us to the grave. And so, if we're going to strengthen our families, we have got to uh, strengthen our young men and look to them to develop them as leaders. Um, Boys and girls are different. God made male and female, and both of them, males and females, have different roles that we play in the home. The home is the single most important entity that God has implemented and created. And if we are going to be the people that God calls us to be, we must strengthen our families. Now, our families in the African American context do not look like uh, most families that you would see typically uh, in a primarily white home structure. Structures uh, have evolved over the years to include not only just those that are blood, but also those that belong to the village. We have what we call a village mentality, that all elders are to be looked upon for wisdom and guidance. We have this system where our families may not consist of just those that are born to the family, but those that may have been adopted. We have a tendency to raise children within our family, within the family, with the family member. Um, uh, Very rarely back in the day did children get in the system, and if they did, if that was a family member that was able to take them, they would keep them out of the system. And many times, brothers and sisters stepped in for their own family to raise children. Oftentimes, our grandparents have been that safety net to raise young people to step in and provide guidance, to provide a safety net and a haven for our young people. And so, as time has gone on, this has proved to be and valuable. I'm not sure where we got off the track with uh, being having this safety net. I'm not sure what has happened to the family to the point where we're trying to um, raise children, but for whatever reason, it seems like we have left the boys behind. Now, there's no discrimination against girls. We're going to talk about how to raise girls, but the truth of the matter is, how many of us ever had a parenting class? How many of us have ever been taught how boys think, how think? so that we can rear our children in a way that we don't expect false expectations, that we know when they're on track. We know what they need so that we can provide it so that they don't go looking somewhere else. And so I want us to understand that this strengthening the family has to start with the African American male, has to start with the Black male. We have to start getting them when they are young and impressionable in their formidable years so that they will develop these things that we instill in them. A lot of the lessons that our older ancestors, our predecessors taught, you will not be able to find in a book. Neither will there be anything to instruct, written for instruction. It was something that was learned, it was caught. And so parenting can be taught. You can have classes, but really it's something to be caught. And the lessons that our young men need to know are lessons that are also caught. They're caught from their mentors. They're caught from being around and spending time with their parents, with their grandparents, with their family that already molds who they are before they even get into preschool or kindergarten. A lot of times before they even get into school, they're in Sunday school in the traditional Black church, Sunday school. They're in youth programs. They're in Baptist Training Union. They're in Baptist Young People's Union. That's the way it used to be. And now that many in the modern church have pushed these teaching arms aside, then we have to make up for the teaching, the discipline, and the principles. We have to make up for that. We have to do it on purpose. We have to spend time with young people. We have to know what they need and provide those things that they need. So thank you for everyone that has come in this morning. As you come in, uh, let's talk a little bit about it, and see what the preface is, and why we should do this. I'm going to show you from the scripture what the Bible suggests that should happen. What the Bible suggests that should happen with our children. And let's see if I can pull it up. Proverbs chapter 22. Let's see if I can pull this up so you can see it. I want to share with you. And here is Proverbs chapter 22. This is what I want to share with you. The Bible says in Proverbs chapter 22, this is our scripture basis from where we are launching this discussion from. Proverbs 22 says, a good name is rather to be chosen than great riches, and loving favor rather than silver or gold. The rich and poor meet together. The Lord is the maker of them all. A prudent man foreseeth the evil and hideth himself, but the simple pass on and are punished. By humility and fear of the Lord are riches and honor and life. Thorns and snares are in the way of the froward. He that doth keep his soul shall be far from them. Train up a child in the way he should go, and when he is old, he will not depart from it. So let's talk a little bit about this, and let's look at this in another in a passage where you or in a version that it may explain it a little bit better to you and to me. Let's look at the NIV. A good name is more desirable than great riches. Rich and poor have this in common. The Lord is the maker of them all. The prudent see danger and take refuge, but the simple keep going and pay the penalty. Humility is the fear of the Lord. Its wages are riches and honor and life. In the paths of the wicked are snares and pitfalls, but those who would preserve their lifestyle stay far from them. Start children off on the way they should go, and even when they are old, they will not turn from it. Start children off on the way they should go, and even when they are old, they shall not turn from it. So here are a few texts that maybe you have not even really considered or thought about. First of all, as this text suggests, the wisdom writer says, start children off on the way that they should go. First of all, it suggests that there is someone that should be teaching children from the beginning, start them off in the way that they should go. So this underscores the importance of a mentor, a parenting, a leadership type of relationship. Start children off, begin them on the way that they should go. Now, this is what that implies. Understand that as we start looking at children are broken down into boys and girls. You have to show a boy the way that he should go. You have to show a girl the way that they should go. All right. So they have to be instructed. They do not come here knowing what they ought to do. I think we expect so much from children. We expect them and we call them, although they look like many adults, they are not adults. Their brains have not developed yet. They come here with something on the hard drive, which I believe is not necessarily good. The reason why I believe that is not necessarily good, or they have to learn how to decipher what is good and what not is good, simply is because the Bible tells us start them off in the way that they should go. They don't come here knowing how to be a man. They don't come here knowing how to be a woman. They don't come here knowing what is proper, what isn't proper. Someone has to show them, but the one that shows them has to step up to this challenge, has to take this challenge, has to basically embody this challenge and develop an ethos, which is the spirit of how they operate. They have to know what is good and what not is, and what's not good. And basically they have to have a foundation themselves. And if the ones that are teaching are off course, the children that they are going to have are going to be what? Off course. Children should be started off on the way that they should go, what the scripture says to do with children. So this implies that you have someone who's in a mentor and a parenting role. Start children off in the way that they should go, because they do need guidance, which implies you have to have adults that also know the way that they should go. If the adults are screwed up, if the adults are not on task, then you're going to have children that are not going to go off in the way that they should go. Remember this, a child is just like a bowling ball. That bowling ball is going to go wherever the hand guides them. Wherever the hand guides them. Imagine this: the floor, the bowling lane, is basically the way that they should go toward the pins. The objective is to knock down every pin. And so there's a hand that comes up to the bowling line and releases the ball in the way that it should go. And check it out. If we curve our hand, the ball is going to go exactly the direction in which we curve our hand. If we look at the spaces down there and we aim for the space, it's the spin that we put on the ball. When that hand comes up behind the ear after we've, approached it and throw it out there, that hand has follow through and it comes back behind the ear. Guess what that is? That's us guiding that ball, and it has follow through. Everything has to have follow through. If we start them off in the way that they should go, if we keep on pushing them in that direction, even when they are old, they will never forget it. They will not turn from it. But if they are turning in their younger years, then guess what you ought to do? If you can't keep that ball as it's released going down the lane, sometimes you have to start out with the bumpers up. We have to understand that as a community of faith, that we are the bumpers that keep that ball, even if it's when it's been released by the parent, it's been released by the one that is training up this child. Sometimes along the way, there has to be the bumpers put up. The bumpers help that ball stay on the lane and eventually get down there where it needs to be. It may not knock out all the pins at first, but then you keep on adjusting. The parent keeps on adjusting, and they keep on throwing it though. It consistently. See, the way that bowlers are developed, they're developed by getting their technique, their approach down, but then they are, as bowlers develop, they tweak what they're doing. In other words, they look at the conditions of the lane. The lane represents the world in which a child navigates. And there are different conditions. Sometimes the lane is dry, and the ball rolls a different way when the lane is dry. Sometimes the lanes have good oil or a lot of excess oil, and you've got to adjust the way you throw the ball. In other words, it's up to the parent to understand as they're launching this child that they have to recognize all conditions that this child is going to be exposed to. And when they recognize those things, when they understand those things, they realize how they need to adjust in order for this child to get it, in order for them to pick it up. Well, young ladies are different from young boys. Yes, all children need to be started off by some person that knows the way, that's assured of the way to go. All right. And if you keep doing this over and over, it becomes muscle memory. It becomes natural. It becomes routine. And when they are old, they won't turn from it. And so this is what God's plan is. Start when they are young. Start when they're young, when they are children. And again, I like to reemphasize this. We have got to start speaking biblical language when we deal with children. Stop calling them kids. They are not kids. You don't see children referred to as kids nowhere in the Bible. Kids are baby goats. Let's start using the terminology that has been used so that they will understand what's expected of them. I expect goats, baby goats, to be rambunctious. I expect baby goats to tear up things. I expect baby goats to wander off. I expect baby goats to just eat grass and do all these other things. And that's the nature of a goat. But the nature of a child is that they should be disciplined. They should be given a framework in which to work in, parameters in which to work in by those that are older than them, so that when they get old, they won't depart from it, and they'll be able to take the place of the parent when they're old enough, when they have children, to do the same thing. What we don't understand is that children do grow up. We do expect them to take our places. We do expect them to become leaders. We do expect them to do better than we did, because the scripture tells us that each generation gets weaker but wiser. And so we want to make sure, we want to ensure that our children go in the right direction. So as we think about it, as a counseling psychologist, I realize that we have to teach boys and we have to teach girls. And so I started out with the boys because the boys are to be what? They are to fulfill their role that God has given them to, has put them here for. The brains of boys and girls have some significant differences. So they need to be brought up with distinct approaches. And so sons are different from daughters. I received an anonymous letter, but I'm glad I received it, that said, Pastor Noble, basically, will you continue saving our sons? SOS. And I said, I said to myself, yes, I do desire to continue SOS. Well, it's urgently needed. Save our sons is urgently needed. And I pray that you, the sheriff's department, the police, all of these entities will come together to find solutions to help our young men, especially with the gun violence. That touched my heart. Not to pat myself on the back, but to say to me, we need to be doing more. It says to me, we're going in the right direction. And so then I'm grateful for people that have saw the effort. And now I'm asking us as a church family to be a part of this effort. And we start at home. We start in our own church. We start in our own houses. And so, I want to start off by giving us some tips then to deal with our young boys. First of all, boys show a higher activity level usually than girls from infancy onward. Young ladies are more likely to engage in indoor play, or if they do go outside, it's a little low level play. But boys are more likely to engage in outdoor play, rough play, and activities that cover large areas of physical space. Boys build castles, boys build forts, boys run nonstop, boys just run all over the place, flailing their arms, because the way boys experience the world is moving through that world. It's a little bit different. Boys tend to have greater spatial skills. They are better usually at manipulating objects in space. That's a skill called mental rotation. Boys tend to have an advantage with embedded figures recognition, which gauges a person's ability to find geometric shapes in larger designs. This would explain why boys do a whole lot better what? In geometry. And when boys get older, this spatial acuity means they can exhibit greater navigational skills like map reading. That's why boys have a better sense of where they are and can read maps and do all these things that sometimes girls have a little bit of difficulty with. So is it any wonder why boys spend the majority of their time in motion, rotating themselves through physical space? Space is the air they breathe, and they are wired to interpret the world by running, playing, skipping, etc., etc., etc. Boys have a lot. In other words, all I've just said is boys got a lot of energy, and if they got the space to roam, they're going to roam every bit of that space. Boys are more likely to handle objects physically. Girls are more likely to use visual exploration. They'll look at it first, usually before they touch it. And interestingly enough, male and female infants show different reactions when left alone to explore. But likely to explore things and become more independent, whereas girls usually are not as busy. Boys move through space as they discover and conquer their worlds, where girls are a lot less rambunctious. And so this is necessary for us to know and to understand, so that when we start dealing with young boys, we realize that we can't sit them down and just lecture to them. We are going to have to put forth models in front of them to teach them. Not only does this transfer, this particular pedagogy transfer, and pedagogy means a method of instruction or methods of teaching. Not only does this pedagogy prove valuable in our daily lives, but it really holds true in the schools. This is why our young boys are labeled by primarily white teachers who are female. They are labeled troublemakers. A lot of boys are. Is because they don't really understand that sitting 8 hours in a classroom is not the way to instruct young men, boys that are becoming men. And so then they get sent out of the Sunday school class, even at church. They get moved and around, and people don't want to deal with young boys from the time that they are young. And what happens is they are left to find their own way. But Proverbs tells us, start children off on the way that they should go. And even when they are old, they will not turn from it. Whenever possible, we have got to encourage our boys to get outside and involved in hands-on exploration. All right. In addition to giving him a book about bugs, you have got to take him outside and let him capture bugs. Teach him about the circumference or diameter by letting him measure the bug. You see how that lesson changed? Girls probably not going to want to handle lizards and frogs. But if you get that young boy who is interested in catching that lizard, catching that frog, then what do? When you catch the frog, let's measure the frog. This is how you measure him. You take him from here to here. Of course, he's going to have his gloves on and everything while he holds the frog. And you show him how to do that. Remember, male brains are designed to connect perception with action. So he may understand the concepts better when he is experiencing them physically. So maybe a boy's Sunday school class needs to meet outside in order to teach them about God and his control over nature. I wish y'all would help me here, because this is where a lot of us don't really understand. You cannot expect your son, who is 2 or 3 years old or 4 years old, if you keep them up in a cage to develop. Just as you wouldn't expect a puppy to develop well if it's always kept in a cage, a boy cannot develop well if they are constantly contained and confined. There are times that he should sit quietly, but there are also times to run, play, jump, and yell. And remember, I told you a boy's brain is like a waffle. He goes from square to square, and he doesn't want to go to the other square until he finishes what has been started in the square previous. Whereas a young lady's brain is more or less like spaghetti. Female brains generally find a connection in everything. So you put their brains on a plate, it looks like spaghetti. That means that everything is, guess what? Connected for them. And they get the connections quicker than boys can just by sitting and looking. Boys have to experience things to see. And yes, ma'am, Sister Garvin, they will bring those bugs into your house and surprise you with them, because that's what boys do. And if we are to get the best for our young men, African American young men, if we are to touch them where they are in order to get them where they need to be, then we have really got to understand the pedagogical design, design of males and females, and then conduct ourselves accordingly. So listen, a child growing up in the projects without a playground is going to tear up an apartment. Plain and simple. If you don't have enough space for a boy to play, he's going to tear up the inside. Take them, they need to get out in a park, in a field somewhere. He's got all this energy. So the first thing that I want to throw out there is encourage physical exploration with the young man that is in your life. That means that men are going to have to step up to the plate and speak life into the lives of our young men. It's important for a father to do this. This is why we need both parents, because the truth is that's not going to interest a woman. A woman's going to want to stay inside. A woman's going to want to do it from the inside of the house. They're going to want the boy to sit down, behave, and look at the TV. That's not how boys operate. Just showing them something on TV ain't going to get it. You got to have manipulatives in order to stimulate a young boy and for him to keep those lessons. That's why men in the church need to be active with boys. That's why we need to take them out. And listen, we don't need some organization that exploits boys to show us how to do this. We have enough skill. We have enough ex-military. We have enough prior service guys. We have people that are Marines, that have been sailors, that have been soldiers, that have served in various capacities. And we can take our young men out and show them the basics of life. And while we are showing them the basics of life, we are also instilling in them a sense of who God is. And when we engage these boys from being idle minds, because we do know that an idle mind is the devil's workshop. Come on, if a boy isn't fully engaged, as I taught kindergarten, I had to actually take my room and put it together in such a way that the boys would not get bored. So I created centers in my classroom for all of our children to move around, and they would learn a new skill. They learned shapes at one. They learned numbers at another one. They learned colors at another one. And I realized that if I broke my classes down into groups of four, and I put some boys, and mixed it up with the girls, I noticed that they both discovered things differently. And I noticed that the boys usually will be the first ones to pick up an object. And I realized that if I gave boys more responsibility, if I gave boys leadership opportunities, just as well as girls, but I'm talking my boys that always seemed like they were getting in trouble, I had to talk to 3 and 4 times. I realized that if I gave them something to do that involved them moving around, that those boys simply were not bad boys, but they were just boys that were doing what boys do. And so when you know that boys uh, move, the next thing I want to tell you is encourage physical exploration with boys. But then the next thing that I want to tell you is to create times for boys to move. Every 20 minutes, a boy has to move around. His attention span is that long. And so when educators are saying, well, so and so don't pay attention, I guarantee you, if you taught them, they would know it. And yes, Sister Garvin, I do believe, and this is something that I was going to do when I was looking to start a school through our church, that boys and girls would be in the same school, but they would be separated in class until the years where they could handle being in the classroom with the opposite sex, because girls really are a distraction to young boys learning. Because why? Young boys want to explore. They want to explore their environment and the world around them, and they ain't gonna pay attention. The girls usually have a longer attention span because they're not as mobile as boys. They play in different ways. They don't throw stuff like that usually. All right, they develop differently. The next thing I want to tell you is to create spaces for boys to move. You create times for boys to move, because boys can be put in very regimented places, but you also create spaces for a boy to move through. They need larger spaces, and that space can be an outdoor park or a field or a big place like a gym. Boys like to run around. The second thing that the fourth thing I want to tell you is let a boy wear themselves out. Boys have energy. Let them use it up. If you put a book in front of them and you try to keep that energy bottled up and contained and directed toward non-active play, that energy is going to come out somewhere else. That boy is not going to sit there and absorb everything just by looking if he cannot manipulate it. See, I'm going somewhere with this because a lot of us are telling, that's a bad boy. He won't sit down. He won't be quiet. He keeps unbuckling his seatbelt. Yes, he's going to do that. Why? Because he is a boy. And that means that if he is doing that, you need to engage him. Parents, Christian parents, we cannot be lazy and parent children. We cannot be lazy and parent children. I'm going to say it a third time. We cannot be lazy and try to parent our children. No, you can't work all day and be so tired that you don't have time for your children and send them off to do their homework without checking it. Go to your room, clean your room without inspecting it. Children want to make you proud. Boys want to make you proud. No boy comes here with a gun in his hand saying, I'm going to shoot people. But I guarantee you, if you put a gun in his hand and you don't teach him how to use it responsibly, if you don't teach him where to point it and not to point it at anybody, then he is going to do what comes to him by nature. That's why we've got to start off children on the way that they should go. Yes, he's going to pick up a slingshot, or what we call a blank shooter. That's what they used to call them when I was growing up, a NIGGA shooter. But teach them that's not the way that it should be. Teach them how to be responsible, but you don't have to keep them from things, but you surely need to teach them how to be responsible with those things. But if you're expecting a child to do, a boy to just sit there and listen to you and don't do nothing, then you are headed for a dead end street, and you are not allowing them to be who they are. And when we don't allow them to be who they are naturally, without guards, without bumpers up, they are going to choose the path that they want to choose. And how many children choose the path of the straight and narrow? Foolishness, the Bible will tell us, is in the heart of a child. And this is true right here in the 15th verse. Look at the 15th verse. Folly is bound up in the heart of a child, but the rod of discipline will drive it far away. Do you see this? This didn't say beat them to death. It talks about the rod of discipline. The rod of discipline is what we have been given us in the word. What is the rod of discipline? Remember this word: spare the rod and spoil the child. If the parent doesn't discipline a child who misbehaved, the child will become accustomed to getting their own way and won't learn what's right. That's why we got to raise children, and children don't just come up. See, grass is trained to be grass, and what you don't want in grass are weeds. Y'all hear me? But weeds just come up, and if you do not tend to the grass, the weeds will choke it out. Hear me when I tell you, weeds just come up. Nobody has to raise a weed. Before you know, and the weed grows fast. Before you know it, a weed pops up. The next thing you know, the weed is growing. The next thing you know, the weed is blooming. The next thing you know, the seeds of that weed are gone everywhere. And before you know it, you got this big old weed in a vacant lot. You didn't do anything for it to grow, but it grew. Why? Because it's a weed. A child is not a weed. A child has a lot of foolishness in here. They haven't fully developed in here. They haven't fully developed. And what we have to do is put the bumpers up as we launch them on their way, the bowling analogy, as we launch them along their way, and the church and the community become the bumpers to guide that ball down there. Because children will go astray depending on the conditions of the lane, which represents the world. Sometimes the oil is going to be plenteous. Sometimes it's going to be dry. Sometimes the oil spreads out over time. If the ball's been thrown down there, it soaks up oil. And it's up to the parent to wipe that oil away on that ball and keep on throwing it down the lane the same way every time to get the strike, to knock all the pins down. And one of the ways to do this is to discipline with the rod. Now, this discipline with the rod does not mean that you are to beat the hell out of them. That's not what we're to do. I'm going to beat the hell out of you. No. No. Children are going to do stupid, foolish things, but correcting them will drive that foolishness far away. And what I'm saying to us is that we've got to get our young children, we got to bring them under our wings, and we're going to have to teach them. We're going to have to educate our children. And when we educate our children, this is what I want you to really understand. When we educate them, when we spend time with them, when we teach these boys in the way that they learn, then they're going to grasp it. It's not going to say that they ain't going to try to go toward the gutter. It's not going to say that they're not going to get it. But what it does say is that when they get old, they won't depart from it. And if you have put up the proper boundaries, the bumpers, the rod of correction, then when they do get off the path, they won't go from it. In other words, when they think about going off the path, they'll get quickly back on that path because you've taught them right. They will know when to apologize. They will know when to ask for forgiveness. They will know when they are wrong because you've taught them right from wrong. I'm giving us a lesson today so that we can understand when and where we need to engage them. We need to engage our boys from the very time they come out of the womb. And realize as they develop, they don't just come up like weeds. It's a technique to raising children. You give them Coco Melon, you give them Go-Go Thomas, you give them all of these things that are used in the secular world to teach object lessons. But when do we give them the Bible? When do we give them the biblical concepts? You read bedtime stories. How many of you have read biblical stories? It's all right to teach them math, but teach them how God created the earth and rested. Let them count the days of creation. I'm giving us some insight on how we can help save a generation. And if we save one generation and bring them to Christ, subsequent generations will follow if we stay on this road. What has changed? Children being born, have the children changed? I don't think the children have changed. Children these days ain't like they used to be. No, adults these days are not like they used to be. Children are the same, but it's the adults who are responsible. If they're failing, we are failing. And so when we know better, we do better. So what are we to do? We should encourage physical exploration for boys. We should create times for boys to move. We ought to create spaces for boys to move. We ought to let boys wear themselves out, because if we don't, that energy is going to come out negatively somewhere else. Then we should play games that take advantages of the boy's strengths. Since the boy is spatial oriented, we should choose games that boys will relate to. Boys don't play with dolls. You let them wear your clothes. You let them play in your high heels. You let them put on your bras. You let them wear the underwear on your head. What you think you're going to get? And I know that sounds, some people, oh, that's machoism and da-da-da-da-da. Boys and girls are not the same. Boys gravitate to cars. Boys gravitate to trucks. They gravitate to airplanes. They gravitate to spaceships. They gravitate to sticks and rocks and throwing things. You've got to engage a boy, and boys have to see positive male role models in their lives. They got to see positive male role models in their lives. Boys rest. Boys like to rest because when you build up a tremendous amount of energy, and you spend that energy, you got to recharge and renew. How does a boy do with that? Boys zone out. You always got to, hey son, stay on task. Hey son, get your mind together. Where are you? Where are you? Are you with us? Are you with us? You got to do that from time to time with a young man. It may sound like a contradiction, but the male brain appears to recharge and renew themselves by basically turning off most of the lights. That's what boys do. They zone in or out. And it's just like a computer. A computer is woke while you're actively engaging on it, but when you stop typing, it goes into rest mode. It's still operational. It's still there, but it's conserving energy that will be needed the next time it's activated. And so you got to allow a boy to keep himself activated, because a boy, when they're zoning out, they use their body and their mind to keep being mentally attached to something. Well, what am I saying? Boys will get the pencil and start drumming on the table. I told you this last week. Stop all that noise, boy. Boy, stop that. What are you doing? Tell you what, let's go outside and let's play. That ought to be the next response. That ought to be the next response. The screen is blank, but the computer's still on, waiting for the next opportunity. So if he's fidgety, blah, 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 the boy some people think that young man is not paying attention, but it's really not that. He's just trying to stop from going into the rest state because he's really trying to hear what you're saying. So male brains need a little bit more time to power back up, to come out of the rest state. And this is what explains how boys can be watching TV 1 minute and then tearing up something the next minute. It's because you've got to keep that young man stimulated so his brain can stay engaged. We got two hemispheres of the brain. You have the right and the left. The female brain seems to have more conversations with the right and the left, whereas the boys don't. That's why females usually have more verbal skills and have more words than boys usually do. Girls can process those more complex things a little bit quicker the way that they are designed. And studies show that at an earlier age, girls tend to be more verbal, develop more complex language skills, and utilize a larger vocabulary than boys. But compared to girls, many boys might be considered slower. But when you compare boys to boys, their verbal skills, vocabulary, and all their development is usually right on track. So taking more time to develop language skills with boys pays off. But it doesn't mean that boys are any less intelligent than girls. It just means that there are things that girls do a little bit better than boys. And then there are going to be some things that boys do that girls just don't develop as fast to do. So you have to have patience to teach boys, period, bottom line, up front. But in order to teach the boy to be patient, you have got to teach yourself to be patient. But if he's going to learn patience for himself, you've got to teach him to be patient with himself. And in order to teach him to be patient with himself, you've got to be patient with him. You've got to model what patient looks like. Because when boys get frustrated, I can't get it. They tap themselves on the head. They, I'm never going to get this. That's how boys operate. It's frustrating to them. And you got to teach them how to get through the frustration. And you got to have patience with them. I didn't say punk them out. I didn't say allow them to whine and do all of those other things. But you got to help encourage them. Got to help encourage a boy to use his words. And that's right. Sister Kanzada, you're exactly right. I love to read books too. And they love to draw. Yes. Does not necessarily like sports, but here's the deal. They are different. Boys and girls are different. Some will like other things that are not necessarily what boys like. In other words, we have to stimulate them by doing whatever stimulates them. Reading a book, but don't leave them alone. When they're drawing, ask them what they're drawing, why they're drawing it, etc., etc. You have to engage them. All right. Boys will, as Reverend Taylor has said, will shut down, especially if it's a lot of chatter going on. Boys try to get away from that, but we have to encourage them to use their words. And how do we do that? We encourage them with physical movement. One of the best ways to encourage a boy to talk is to get him involved in an activity and engage him in conversation about what is happening. If he's drawing a tower, ask him who built the tower. Why was it built? What happens if the tower that you have drawn is knocked down? Incorporate that verbal expression along with his natural physical exploration, and you'll see that child evolve into his best self. Sister Kanzada, that's another way. He may not like, quote unquote, sports, but he still needs to be engaged. I mean, I do like being outside. I do like to play sports, but I also like to read as well. I also like to develop that physical part as well. Boys tend to want to do more physical activity, even if they draw toward things that the typical boy doesn't do. But he can't be a couch potato. And these children today, we put video games in front of them and we expect them to just be occupied all day long, but they don't develop no other skills. Just because they like to read and write, we also have to encourage them to also get out and be physical. That's a part of all of our lives, or else we're going to have children that are obese, children that are just they're going to be lazy and they're not going to do anything. What's wrong with being a scholar basketball player? What's wrong with being a scholar football player? What's wrong with being a scholar track star? They don't have to just do one or the other. They can be well-rounded as well. Again, we need to teach them. We have to show them. They will have natural inclinations toward things, but just like we have to encourage young ladies also to get involved physically, because a lot of times they don't want to. And just because they don't want to, and that's just the way we are, doesn't mean that we don't encourage them to do and explore different things. Remember, I believe God created different and complementary genders with great similarities, but also unique characteristics, behaviors, and physiology. And when I see these differences, I see the complexity and the diversity of God's creation. Different strokes are for different folks. And I want you to know that girls and boys are different. A child reading and writing, that's not necessarily a girl's thing. That's a thing that we all need. Then we get to what a girl needs to know how to become a wife, and a boy needs to know how to become a husband. A girl needs to know how to behave like a lady, and a boy needs to know how to behave like a man. And as they mature, their brains are wired different. The boy's brain is like a waffle on the plate, compartmentalized. A girl's brain is like spaghetti. She realizes the connections between everything, but that doesn't mean that we don't develop the skills in our children. So we have to guide our young people. And one of the things that I said last week is that a boy needs to know that I believe in you. I believe in you. And when we come back tonight at 6:30, I'm going to talk about the need for a young man to know that we believe in them. And it needs to come from the family first. This is about self-esteem and how I view myself. Because society views our young black boys differently. Society views our black boys differently than we do. And if you know that this is in the heart of children, and you know how boys are to grow up and be brought up to be men, and how girls are brought up to be young ladies, then what we need to do is continue to teach them so that they can get it. Because right now, for the first time in our nation's history, our sons are less educated than their fathers. And now a growing segment of our population as black men are imprisoned, they are killing themselves, and they are living in poverty, and they're producing children, but they are not fathering those children that they are producing. That's a dismal analysis. Many boys are growing up to be men who, as a group, are struggling. And that's not unique. That's become the norm in our society. I want to talk about that when we come back tonight. How to deal with our young men and how to guide their character so that they will have respect for human life, will not get involved in this killing in the streets. I'm going to be honest with you. The police are not the answer. Why do we run to the police? To learn how to deal with our children. Why do we run to the corrections system? Well, maybe they need to go to jail. No, they don't need to go to jail. We need to hold class. We need to teach them. The penal system is not a good teacher. So what are we doing in our churches and our homes? We've got to recognize our boys' capacity for character. And that's what we'll talk about tonight. God bless you. And thank you, Sister Livingston. 5 sons, and all of them had different men talents. That's right. And thank you for sharing that. What wisdom, what knowledge. And we come back tonight, we'll talk a little bit more about some keys to raising our young boys to be spiritually mature young men. God bless you. I look forward to continuing this dialogue at 6:30, Lord willing.
Let me hear you say it now.